Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer to put this one out, but I do promise I'm going to keep making videos and whatnot. I just had a lot of stuff going on and we're back on track now. So this video is going to be focused on defense. I'm going to try extremely hard to keep this right about 20 minutes, hopefully a little bit less than that, since I know a main complaint for a lot of people was how long my videos were. I was wanting to try and cover a ton of different topics, and so unfortunately that takes a lot of time to try and cover the depth in them and try to comprehend, help you, if you're a newer player, to help comprehend certain things. So what we're going to be going over today is going to be ground and air blocking. We'll get into highs and lows and how those impact how you can block certain moves. We'll get into reflect. It's properly called Z reflect, but you just say reflect. Breaking dragon rushes, and then also breaking grabs, and then getting into guard canceling as well. So all of these are going to be wrapped up in terms of the options that you have for defense and what you can utilize whenever that you are blocking. Now if you're a new player, I strongly suggest that you get very, very familiar and comfortable with blocking. I know it's not something that you want to do, since this game rewards a lot of offensive pressure, like a lot, because you gain more meter. Even moving forward towards your opponent, you're rewarded because you get meter build and whatnot. So it's a little unfortunate that a lot of people skip over defensive aspect of the games, but you can be greatly rewarded, considering that you're able to brush up and understand when and how to block and when to use other tools, considering that you're still a little bit lost on the subject. So first things first, so let's get into ground blocking, and then we'll get into highs and lows. So in terms of how the game works for what you need to block and whatnot, so let's set to guard all. Actually, let's restore defaults. We're going to have guard all. So you'll notice that whenever that we block high, the computer actually, whenever we attack high, the computer is blocking standing. Now, whenever we block mids, hit mids, you see that the computers remain standing. And then when you do a low attack, like Goku's 2M here, the computer suddenly drops down and he crouches whenever he's blocking. So the reason for that being is that there are basically three types of sections that you can hit people. You can hit people high, you can hit people in the middle, which is blocked by either highs or lows, high or low blocking, or you can hit low, which is only blocked by low blocking. So to make this simple in terms of the way that you can comprehend it, the easiest thing for you to remember is that if somebody is in the air, make sure that you're standing up. If the person is not in the air, then you can block low. Now, there are certain moves that are universal to attacking people in the air, so you don't always have to jump up in order to do that. You can do something which is known as a universal overhead, which is a sits M. If you've been watching my other videos and you understand the directional numeric annotation for fighting games, then you'll know that a sits is going to be towards the opponent, so relative to the side that you're on. So for Android 16, that is going to be going to the left, and to Goku, that is going to be going to the right. So towards the opponent, and you have to hold this button, and then you have to hit the medium, and then you'll notice that that looks like an overhead, which it is, in the same way that if you were to jump and hit the heavy, it's going to be the same thing. So whenever that you are first learning the game, getting comfortable and whatnot, you need to learn how to block lows. That is probably the first thing that you need to understand and feel comfortable with. So thankfully, it's a little, and I'm going to use kind of quotes here, harder to get into somebody doing overheads, but once that does become a factor, then you need to be able to read that and analyze it. So if you have somebody that's going to just be blocking low a lot of the time, so we can do that. We can set it to don't switch, and we'll have him to crouch. So remember that he's going to guard all. So if you were to throw out a ton of attacks here and then go into block strings and whatnot, then none of this is going to open up the computer, and that is because he is blocking low, which all of our moves that we're doing on the ground, unless we do something that you jump up in the air and hit him, or unless you do that sits M, as I mentioned, then you are going to be safe. So whenever that you are first learning the game, whenever you're getting familiar with it, if you're going into ranked, if you're going into casuals and whatnot, most of the time you need to be very, very comfortable with just blocking low. Now, this does have a downside to it in that if you get overly comfortable with blocking low, then you're not going to be used to blocking air attacks, such as the sit-em into an assist of some kind, and then that can lead into a combo. Or simultaneously, if you're not used to somebody doing a little bit of stagger and then going into an IED, which is an instant overhead, which is where you do that dash, and then going and hitting you with some sort of move to open you up. So if you see the person leave the ground in any way, and this applies to universal overhead because they jump up in the air whenever you're doing that, then you need to actually block high. Otherwise, for most characters, you can block low if they are on the ground. Now, there are some exceptions to this, of course, considering that there's somebody like, I believe Nappa is for sure one of them, where he has he like kind of runs at you and kind of does like a few karate chops. I'm very, very certain that those hit high. And then there's a few other characters that actually hit high. I believe Hit is another one that has a move that he actually doesn't have to leave the ground. But most of the time, any of these moves have a bit of a gap in them or some sort of startup that is going to hit you high, and they actually don't leave the ground. And the same thing that the sit-em for whenever that you go overhead like this, that is going to have a lot of startup time to it as well. So let's get into kind of air blocking real quick before we move on. So for air blocking, you don't have to worry about highs and lows. Pretty much the only thing that you have to worry about is going to be just that you're actually holding back. So you can hold any of the back options, so that's going to be just straight back, that's going to be kind of diagonally towards the corner, which is going to be a 9 or a 7, or I guess for my camera it's going to be 9 or a 7 depending on where you're looking, 4 sits, or then kind of low, which would be 1 and a 3. So I am just holding straight back and nothing else. So this should be safe, considering that I am not considering that I am not going to be getting hit by a low and be held in block stun when I fall down. So that is going to be there. And then there's the low that actually opens me up, and that's because I'm holding back and up to try and jump. And then we can show that again. There is that low. Otherwise, you can just hold back right there. And then if you would like to, then, as I mentioned, then you can hold the down after. I'm trying to jump and then shift it to holding down. As you can kind of tell the inputs on the side there. Let's do that. And then at the very, very end there, however, when he's falling, if you're holding down when you touch the ground, you're going to have to be careful for those overheads. And then he's holding down right there. Down. And then that one, he was actually standing. So this is where you need to be very, very careful for these highs and lows, in terms of if you're starting to get hit whenever that you're blocking, you don't have to worry about highs and lows until you actually hit the ground, which is of course what we had just gone over in terms of the material. So make sure that you get familiar with those types of attacks, and then when people do certain block strings. The only other thing to kind of mention as far as for air blocking is that, considering that you actually do block in the air, is that the opponent will be able to actually have their air options restored, considering that you block something pretty simple. So what do you mean by air options restored? So you have a jump, and then you have one more jump in the air. So aside from that, then you can do a super dash. So considering that you actually end up blocking that, which I'm just going to have in super dash, and that's it. So considering that you were to jump and then double jump, and then you block the super dash, you have another jump after that. So that probably seems a little bit interesting. So you might be thinking, okay, well, what can I do after that? Well, depending on who you are or what you want to do, what you feel most comfortable with, is that you can go for an IAD forward. If you want to go on the offense, though, instead, then you can IAD forward and then actually go towards the opponent, considering that they use their jump options. Because remember, considering that they're going to super dash to you and that they do this, then they actually have another jump option unless they exhaust their double jump, which is the aerial one. Then they can't IAD forward. But if they only go up in the air, go like that, then they actually still have one more jump that they can do. So that's some things that you have to keep in mind as well for air blocking, and that you do have another jump at the end there. So let's start getting into reflect. So reflect is going to be the move where you're going to basically go like this and you push the opponent away, considering that there is a gap in there or that they try to attack you. Now I know I mentioned a gap and I sort of jumped the gun there a little bit. So what I mean for that is if somebody is doing a block string, and we'll set the computer to do this because the computer is extremely efficient at doing the reflect. So we'll set them to guard all, and then the counter attack is going to be a reflect. So what this is going to be is that if there is a gap in a string, or if the opponent likes to mash or anything like that, and they don't properly have a block string, one that doesn't have any gaps in it, then you can actually throw out a reflect to push them away and then hopefully counter attack with something. So you have to be very, very careful though, because the Z reflect does have a bit of vulnerability to it at the very end. So considering that you were to punch and then the opponent were to do that because you actually paused yourself or got to the end of a string, so like here, then there is that actually opening. Now you have to wait until they're basically done waving their arms, as if you were to do it in the middle of that before they actually have it totally out, then there is that kind of gap, or I'm sorry, there's that window in there where they can still reflect any other attacks. So you have to wait until they're basically done with their arms waving. So where can you kind of use this? So if your opponent, and you notice, isn't very clean for their strings, so if they kind of take their time for doing, we'll have guard all, but we won't have the reflect. So if you see that their moves are kind of staggered like this, and it might be kind of hard to see, but I'll show you full speed. And I know that we're kind of dealing in terms of frames here, but so full speed, and then slower speed. There are gaps in there which are able to be reflected, which can open up space for you, considering that you notice this. Now this will take a lot of practice, but as you can see, there are gaps in there, taking a little bit of time. And this does have frame 1 startup, so considering that there's any sort of gap, then you can actually punish this. Now, of course, this is going to be a good tool, considering that you can properly use it, and you only use the necessary amount of reflects that are required to get you to a safe position. However, if you do use too many reflects, then you are going to leave yourself in that vulnerable state. So that is going to be a really good option. It also works against T-blasts and beams. Oops. And then it should even work against something like a Kamehameha right there. So this works against projectiles. Now, why would you want to use reflect over something like just blocking? Well, you actually do recover faster using the reflect in comparison to just blocking an attack. So considering that you're able to acknowledge and identify the openings there, then you can actually go ahead and use that as an option. As a small note here as well, you can actually super dash through Key Blast, since I was mentioning that you can reflect Key Blast and beams. There we go. Then that is an option. Now, of course, you cannot super dash through a beam, which is going to have a higher priority in terms of a projectile. But Key Blasts are going to be a very, very low priority. Vegeta's a really, really good example of that. Especially with even that, with his flurry of attacks right there for the Key Blast. That's going to be a really, really big thing, or in the air as well. So just keep that in mind as something that you can actually go through as well. So let's get into Dragon Rushes now. So Dragon Rushes are going to be something which is basically a grab in this game. So we can actually set to guard all, and then we can even set it to reflect, because the reflect actually has no sort of counter for the Dragon Rush. So if you actually throw out just like a Key Blast and then go straight into a Dragon Rush, or if you call in an assist, oh, I'm sorry, he's of course in hits and block stun right there, so that's not allowed. See how he was building up for the reflect, which typically would have worked. However, if we were to wait for that and go straight into Dragon Rush, then you can actually break through that. So how do you actually break Dragon Rushes? Well, you can break Dragon Rushes by actually inputting some sort of move on your own. So let's set the computer to actually do the Dragon Rush. And that should be fine. Oops. Alright, that should be okay. So things that you have to be careful about for Dragon Rushes is that depending on when you actually hit a button to be able to break a Dragon Rush, something may or may not go through. Whether that's for you blocking it, because if you were to do something like a very late heavy attack, it may not go through, which that one went through. Let me see if I can show you a good option. Right there, for example, that we were in the startup period for our attack, and we were unable to break the Dragon Rush. Now, depending on exactly when you do it, you may or may not get a hit, or you may just get that clash there to kind of break it. So the most reliable thing that you can actually do for the Dragon Rush is to be able to actually hit the Dragon Rush button of your own. So whether you feel more comfortable with hitting the medium and the light, which is going to be the X and Y on the X spots, or it's going to be the triangle and the square on a DualShock 4 PlayStation 4 controller, then you can do whatever you're more comfortable with. Default, of course, is also the right bumper or R1 for you all on PlayStation, of course. But yeah, if somebody were to do that, you have a small window whenever that you can actually break the Dragon Rush. And of course, there is a pretty wide box that you can actually catch people with this. This will apply in the air as well. So considering that you like to do a lot of up tets and somebody catches onto that, then they can just jump up in the air. Now, keep in mind that you have to be actually in the air for this to work as well. The same thing for a break. So if you see somebody kind of whiff this, feel free to punish them and start hitting buttons immediately. So that's pretty much breaking Dragon Rushes and what you can do. Other things that you can do, of course, if it's on the ground, then you can just jump straight up in the air. If it's in the air, unfortunately, you really can't do much to break it, with the exception... I'm sorry, there's not much that you can do to dodge it, considering that they actually hit you. You can attempt to break it on your own, or if for some reason you're out of range, or you do it before they actually get it off, then of course you can actually attack them, but that kind of varies a bit there. So grabs. If you notice the grab actually coming, you can jump up in the air, or you can do a super dash. Certain characters have it built into their strings, so for Android 16 it's something like this, but that grab is not actually going to hit unless it's actually going to be the only hit that would hit you, if that makes sense. So considering that he's far enough away and his light and the medium part of the auto attack don't hit you, but it's the grab portion that actually hits you, then that will actually connect, because it would be the equivalent of if he actually hit you with just a raw grab. But you can't actually use it on a block string. It's kind of to prevent any sort of I want to dare say like cheesy type things, or something being kind of unfair. Same thing for Cell, which let me pull Cell in, because if I remember correctly, Cell has that grab portion of it as well. But if Cell were to do its third attack, then that will actually hit you as a grab. So certain characters have grab factors, or not grab factors, grab moves. And you just need to be able to identify those so that you know when you need to jump out of it or not for certain things. I believe only Android 16 and Cooler actually have aerial grabs, which I can show you that as well. Now those, unfortunately, you have to react to those properly pretty much when the animation is coming out. And you will definitely see what I mean for that. So this is actually going to be invulnerable, or invincible, I'm sorry, to any sort of attack that's already out. So you could throw out any sort of physical attack, and unfortunately you can't block that either. So if you're holding back, let me do that. That's still not going to go through. Now, the only kind of good part is that if you react to it in time, you can get out of it with something like a vanish, because unfortunately super dash, you can't go through it with that either. We can do a vanish. If you see him building up for it, you can throw out something like the T-Blast, which funny enough blocks it, because it's actually a move that is not part of you as like your body. It's actually a projectile, which is a separate part of you. So that's probably a little weird, I know, in terms of the concept of that, but that's something to just keep in mind. Alright, and the last topic we're going to get into is going to be guard canceling. So guard canceling is going to be whenever that you are on defense and you're blocking, and that you want to use, for the cost of 1 meter, one of your assists to be able to be thrown out to interrupt basically the block string that you are in the middle of, or basically the string that the opponent is throwing out for their attacks to be able to build some space for yourself. So let me set cell to attack, and I will show you kind of how that is as a quick example. So that was an example, and it actually got interrupted, which is something that I will get into. Let me try to do it a little better. There we go. So that's a perfect example of how it actually worked. So it costs 1 meter for you to be able to actually do that. But so a very simple way to do this motion, because I know this can be a little bit complex for some people, is if you're blocking low or back, is that you basically just get to the furthest, or I'm sorry, the quickest forward position. So rather than going front to back, it might be better for you to do almost a quarter circle forward motion. So basically the input would be, or I'm sorry, the numeric annotation would be, if you're blocking at 6, then you go 3, 2, 1. Or if you're blocking low, then you go just 3, 2, 1. If you're on the opposite side, then if you're blocking high, you go 4, 1, 2, 3. And if you are blocking low, then you can go 1, 2, 3 instead. So let me show it one more time in the corner. And so that's a pretty quick and easy way that hopefully if you're struggling to do the guard cancel, you can realize that you can kind of just swing it along the bottom. So it builds space for you. Something that you have to be careful for is when the opponent is throwing out certain attacks, you can still get hit by certain attacks, most notably at heavy attacks. So let me try to time that well. Missed it on that one. Let me try to time it for cells. Heavy to come out. So right there, the heavy attack was starting to build up, and then we sent Goku out in the middle of that so we can actually still get hit. For that, we already threw out the heavy attack, so that would actually be a really optimal time for you to do it, is after the heavy attack comes out, considering that they're not going to block. So we've set the computer to be able to do a guard cancel pretty much immediately. Now, if your opponent is staggering their attacks and doesn't continue with their block string and actually basically goes into blocking themselves, meaning that they block your guard cancel, what they can basically do is go into a full combo as if you weren't even blocking whatsoever. So there is kind of a high risk, high reward with this. It does build a lot of space considering that it actually connects, but I'll show you an example of if it goes sour. So right here, we're basically getting off a full combo. You cannot react to this. So considering that you were on the side of a bad guard cancel, this is pretty much an example of exactly the type of combo that can happen to you. So try to keep that in mind whenever that you are actually doing guard cancels, exactly how bad it can go. Of course, like I said, there are really good things about it in the amount of space that it builds for you, and if you're able to actually use it effectively, it does end up being a very strong defensive tool, considering that you actually get very efficient with it. So other things to keep in mind for guard cancel is that you can actually do a guard cancel when you are alone as a last character, and it will actually just throw you behind the person, so that you're actually going to do kind of like a pseudo vanish, basically, and that can be extremely useful if you're already being put into pressure and you're not wanting to actually be attacked, or if you're wanting to just break out of that in some way. Now, as you can tell, you can't really do any sort of offensive attack afterwards. You're kind of just there, but it can get you out of that pressure if you're not wanting to be in the corner and you don't have any other resources left. But it happens pretty often, that I've seen anyways, that you might get down to your last character, and because you ended up losing those characters, maybe you weren't on offense enough and you end up having a lot of bars. So if you have a lot of bars, a lot of meter, and then you end up having like 5, 6, or 7 for some reason, and you're stuck in that corner, don't be scared to use the guard cancel, since it's going to be a lot safer that you're going to end up behind the opponent and that you're not going to be worrying about an attack coming from the front there. So it's sort of covers your back if you end up getting in one of those desperate situations and you're trying to make a comeback of some kind. And that's going to be it for this video. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning on in. As always, I appreciate a lot of feedback down in the comments, whether that you're brand new here, whether you think that I can improve upon something. I did take some of the comments and feedback that you all had given me and tried to put that into this video, as far as for putting a little kind of indents at the beginning. And then I even put the topics at the top, and I chopped up the video to try to make it a little bit faster or shorter of a video. Unfortunately, I still didn't meet my target time that I wanted. Now this is even making it go further, but that's for another time. But of course, sharing the video is always very much appreciated too with anybody that's brand new to the game on any sort of forums or whatnot. I am trying to just give back to the community. I didn't have too many resources that I felt were exactly friendly for brand new players, and so that's where I'm kind of wanting to fill in this gap. So comment down below, thumbs up, share the video, and then if you're new here, even subscribe. I'll be putting out a lot more content. I'll be putting out gameplay VODs as well, so hopefully you can join me on this journey for trying to grow this channel. But as always, thanks for tuning on in, and I'll see you guys in the next video.